The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Vitruvian Man podcast, a podcast centered around self-mastery. I'm your host, Zach Shankin. Today, I'm joined by Jonas Kilker. Jonas is a young actor, student, athlete, and student of philosophy at UCLA. Jonas began his acting career at the age of 21 after a short stint as an EMT and Wildland Firefighter, is currently building his personal brand online. Jonas is a deep thinker, a health-focused young man, and I anticipate a great conversation covering anything from God, culture, philosophy, health, and even maybe some conspiracy. Without further introduction, Jonas, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Wow, that was really concise. That was cool.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I took some inspo from your own bio on your website and threw a little bit
sweet.
of sauce on it as well. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time. It's been a couple good weeks. I know you're on your spring break from school, so it's an excellent time to connect, and we'll definitely get into a little bit of the school stuff because I am fascinated by, and we've discussed a little bit before the call on your decision to study philosophy, which I think is, characteristically more of an uncommon major, and then also pursue acting, which I'm curious to hear about the interplay between those two. But I do typically want to start out. I love hearing people's story to self-mastery, self-discovery, self-improvement, self-development. So take me through a little bit of like your upbringing, and then when you feel like you transitioned into realizing you wanted more from yourself for yourself. Was there a kind of inflection point, either event, person, or book that really kind of kicked things off for you?
Yeah. Man, I feel like there was a lot in that question, but I'll start
it's
at the kind of at the tail end. Definitely what kind of kicked things off for me, as far as like the sort of direction that I'm going in my life now, is that I think I was always really obsessed with sort of anything, just whatever was kind of like drawing my attention at the time, and I would just become really obsessed with things. And I think that for me, for a long time, it was always kind of about trying to, I always wanted to find my career path really early on, you know what I mean? So like even when I was 15 years old, honestly, actually, I think it probably started more when I was like 11, 12 years old. I was in sixth grade, and I was kind of getting like bullied, rightfully so, by these kids who were skaters. And then like I just, I kind of pushed back a little bit, and then they liked me. They wanted to hang out with me. So then they invited me to go skate with them. I didn't even own a skateboard. So then I went to Sports Chalet and bought a skateboard. and I showed up with like my Tony Hawk skateboard, and I just remember like we had just had like our iPhones. Like I don't remember what was out back then, like the 5, maybe iPhone 4 or 5. And I was filming everybody skating, and then we were like posting clips on whatever Instagram, I think it had like just come out, and making YouTube videos and stuff. And then immediately I fell in love with skateboarding and like filming skateboarding. And so that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, was like film skateboarding. I don't know why I just always had this obsession with like picking something and then going balls to the wall with it, trying to make it my entire life, and then I got the job doing that for Dogtown Skateboards. I filmed like a few things for them, like a little commercial and some parts in a skate video, and I realized I only liked it because I was with my friends, and I didn't maybe actually love the filming or the skateboarding necessarily. And that transitioned into music when I was in high school. I was in a bunch of like hardcore and punk bands, and I thought that music was going to be my entire life. I spent all my time doing it, spent all my money recording music and making merch for our band and stuff. And then when that kind of like seemed to be not enough, right when I graduated high school, I started working in construction. And then construction became my new obsession. I spent all my money on tools, and I spent all my money on, anything construction related, just trying to make more money at my job. And then same thing. I was just like, this isn't for me. I'm falling out of love with it. I got to become obsessed with something else. And my girlfriend at the time and my mom's boyfriend gave me the idea of firefighting. And then I went the firefighting route. And then same, you know how the story goes. I did it, spent my whole next 2 years of my life trying to do it, got the job, fell out of love with it. And it's the one takeaway that I've kind of had from that super long-winded cycle of starting and stopping things is I think you just need to be trying something. And then if you try something, you're going to find whatever's next for you, and whatever's next for you is whatever's meant for you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, I guess at the position that you are now, what do you think was the through line between all of those types of things? Like what was consistent across the board? And then where did you, like, what led to the transition towards, one, deciding to pursue an education in philosophy, but two, like deciding also to want to work as an actor? And how old are you now?
Yeah, that's interesting. I had never really thought about kind of like what the one consistent thing was between all of those endeavors, but I'm 23 now. I'm gonna be 24 in July. And I think the one thing that's probably always been consistent is I don't know, I've always really liked sort of feeling like I was in charge of myself. I always wanted to be kind of the one who was calling the shots. And that's definitely not the case when you're in construction and you're not the contractor, or when you're, an EMT or a firefighter, unless you're like the, captain or chief for that matter. But I don't know. I think if I wasn't doing something where I had complete creative control over everything, I think I just wanted it to be something like really badass. I just wanted it to be kind of cool. And like, that's the thing, is construction was really cool when I was 17, because I was like the only 17-year-old there. And all my friends were working at, restaurants or whatever.
Roosters.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was kind of, they're like, oh yeah, like Jonas works at a construction site, like super cool, and I was making a ton of money too. And I think I just always wanted to like have something to show for myself, especially because I didn't go the college route right away, and while all of my friends were at college and they were getting like degrees and stuff, I was like, I need to get something to show from my time that I've spent working, whatever that might be, whether it's a good reputation, whether it's now it's like a cool demo reel and everything like that. But at the time it was money, just anything to kind of show that I'm not a loser. I never wanted to be a loser. That was the one consistent thing.
Do you think that desire is intrinsically driven or extrinsically driven? Like, were you raised in an environment where you felt the need to become something, or like was that demonstrated in like your parents, or
Yeah,
lack thereof that demonstration?
I think it was a little bit of a mix of things. Definitely from my parents. My dad, he was a dentist, and he was also a UCLA alum. He went to Fullerton Community College and then San Diego State for his undergrad, and then went to UCLA for dental school, and then kind of worked his way up the ladder, and then bought his own practice in Long Beach and was a dentist for 30 something years. And I think he always just had this sort of like insane work ethic. That's also where I found my love for the gym. My dad was like a diehard 6 day a week gym guy. All of my friends would ask me, they're like, is your dad a bodybuilder? And I'm like, no, he's a dentist, And I think that his work ethic and drive was definitely something that was instilled in me early, because like I said, he was a dentist. Like, he did pretty well for himself. I didn't need to get a job at 16, 17 years old. I think I just kind of wanted to, because I wanted to show him that I'm like him. You know what I mean? And school was never really my thing, so I didn't think that I was going to be able to do it in that sense and be like, Dad, look, I got into UCLA too, you know. So I wanted to get these like big boy jobs. And my mom, she's an interior decorator and designer, and she's super crafty, always doing arts and crafts. Every time I show up to the house, she's like making something new. I'm actually at my parents' house right now, and she was just like reupholstering a couch, and I stepped on the staples last night, and
Yeah, I
I've got
saw
this
that
like
picture.
giant, oh my god, dude, it was crazy how much I was bleeding, but total sidetrack. uh I got the sort of like creative artisticness, I think, from my mom, where I always wanted to be like making something or creating something, or just like, you know, doing something fun. I find a lot of joy in that. And I think the combination of those two led to me trying a bunch of different things, seeing what stuck, what didn't. And the sort of drive to want to succeed, I think, just came from, I don't know, I think it was mostly from my parents, but a lot of it too was just like seeing, especially when you're like, I hate to put down like the kind of punk rock scene, but it's all very nihilistic, and everybody's just kind of like, oh, everything's fucked, and it's so hard to succeed. And I always thought like, that's not the way that it is. That's not how it should be, you know? And I think I wanted to prove myself wrong, my like high school self, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think there's so much about, becoming a man. Like in the modern West, we no longer have rites of passage. Like there's no
Mhm.
one telling us when we become a man. You just continue to age and then somehow you're an adult. But a lot of times it results
Yeah.
in these very old boys, like unactualized, like
Yeah.
very, very like lost, directionless men. And so a lot of the like self-driven growth ends up becoming that own rite of passage. And I feel like people that are called to it or feel like intrinsically pulled to some sort of like higher standard, especially amongst men, that is almost creating it. And so I'll put myself in that category too, like put ourselves in potentially higher friction environments, whether it's like
Sure. Yeah.
entrepreneurship or like something with a super huge barrier to
Something really
entry,
high
like
stress.
yeah, it could be high
Yeah.
stress, could be something very like physical, like firefighting,
Mhm.
like police officer, but it could also just be something that has a high barrier to entry, like even acting, like you're getting into,
Yeah.
right? That's something
Yeah.
that is tremendously hard to be successful at for a litany of reasons. But I think it's interesting how we kind of create like something in our spirit creates the need to overcome. I think that's something kind of very intrinsic to the masculine. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I'm curious now as you transition out of the firefighter space and like was someone suggesting acting because it seems like it kind of came out of left field. How did it find its way to yourself? And then did you also immediately start going to school in parallel?
Yes, exactly. So what happened was I was living in Washington. I was working as a wildland firefighter there, and I was living with my girlfriend at the time. And she she knew that like I was kind of falling out of love with it. I would tell her about everything, and um, we were just kind of thinking, we were like, damn, like what am I gonna do next? You know, she was doing school online and like trying to find part-time work, and we knew that we were gonna move back home to LA and figure things out there. Um, but we took a trip with my family to Brazil to go. My family's from Brazil, my mom's side, and so we went and stayed with my grandma for a little bit. And while we were there, it was just kind of this like 2 week period of total reflection where we were just like, okay, what's next in life? Like, what are we gonna do next? Where are we gonna go from here? Um, and no shit, she was taking like pictures of me and my brother one day, and she was like, you could be a model. And I was like, I would never be a model. And then she was like, or maybe you'd like acting because you really love to talk. And I was like, yeah, it's a really good reason, right? And I don't know why I like thought of it as a joke at first, but then it was just kind of something that like sat with me, and I was like, did she mean that? And I was like, hey, Chloe, like, did you really mean that? And she was like, yeah, I'm serious, like, you should actually try acting. And so the thought was just like so overwhelming because I had never considered it before, but I think in the back of my head I always thought it would be really cool. And yeah, then I just started looking up like acting classes at my community college, and I found an intro class and I joined. And that was in February of 2020. And after the second or third class, the teacher pulled me aside and was like, hey, you're really good at this. If you want to do this for real in the future, because it's an intro class, there's kids there to just have fun. There's kids there just trying to get artistic credits, whatever. I don't know why she could tell that I was kind of more serious about it. Maybe because I was like older, but yeah, she pulled me aside and she kind of just gave me this hour-long crash course into how the industry works and how to make it, how to get your SAG card, everything like that. And from then I just kind of, again, became obsessed with the idea, watched every single YouTube video I could get my hands on, read a ton of books, tried to learn as much as possible. And then just about a year later, I got my first paid acting gig. And that's how I started.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it is really fascinating how sometimes it takes somebody else expressing the power of yourself or the value of yourself to you for you to really be able to see it. And that can extend to like the things that you do, but even like seeing the beauty in somebody else.
Yeah.
It's crazy how when you hear it from somebody else, it just all becomes very crystallized. I had a
Yeah,
similar
you're
situation.
really
Go ahead.
you're your own worst critic, and so you're always just going to think the worst, and you're never really going to give yourself the benefit of the doubt. So when someone else is able to do it for you, it makes everything a lot easier.
Yeah, and I also think like I don't know how much into like hermetic wisdom and like stuff like that you are, but the concept of like as above so below, or like all is mind,
Mhm.
kind of the world being this projection of our minds. I look at
Yeah.
stuff like that when you hear feedback from the outer world on whatever it may be, whether it's a business you're starting or an idea you have or a pursuit that you're trying to go into. Those are like points of feedback, a
Mhm.
reflection of your internal state, right? Like you said that somewhere deep inside, maybe you had always thought it would be a cool idea, or maybe I have this in me, but it would have never kind of bubbled to the
Yeah.
surface until she reflected it back upon you.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was kind of one of those things, like you said, it was just like resting under the surface. It was like a sleeping thought that I had. And I had always kind of because like, okay, so I'm a history nerd. I love history. It was my first major when I started going back to college. Um and now I'm minoring in it. But it was one of those things where I would always watch these like historical fiction movies or TV shows, whatever, and be like, fuck, this is so cool. Like, what is the closest thing to being a real Viking in our modern era? Or what is like the closest thing to being a pirate? You know what I mean? Like, is it joining the Navy? And that was a thought that occurred to me. Is it like, being in law enforcement? Like, what is the closest thing that we have? I have no idea. um and then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, it's these actors. They're the closest thing, because they actually get to ride horses, and they get to sword fight, and they get to like sail on these ships. Like, they're actually the ones doing it. And then I realized, I was like, wow, you get to learn so many different cultures, and you get to actually do all these things. You get to go horseback riding, and you get to learn how to fight. You get to learn how to shoot guns. You get to do all these things that normally you don't get to really do in your everyday life. And then that was kind of one of those thoughts that I had, because I was, you watch movies and you watch TV, you read books, you get inspired. And when it comes to historical things like that, you don't really get to follow in the footsteps of these people that you see or read about. But in acting, you kind of do, because you can retell that same story.
Yeah, definitely. And there is something really special about the reenactment, reportrayals of those characters throughout history that allows it to be received in a very human way. Like, one example was, like, I happened to be studying AP US history in high school at the same time that Hamilton was released.
Oh,
So,
wow.
like, learning about, like, getting to listen to that play and understand the actual dynamics of like who they were, what was going on, the drama, like being a womanizer, having a son, cheating, losing the son, like all of the stuff going on behind the the person, like really being a
Mm-hmm.
human character, this Alexander Hamilton, versus just, oh, he was a Federalist, anti-Federalist, found the national bank, like the check marks that you're going to get quizzed on. So when we got to that unit, it became this like really technicolor kind of experience because I knew him as a person. And I think history is kind of cool when we get to tell those stories, whether it's film, TV, or really just like a well-written book, that kind of
Yeah,
speaks to the human side, of
for sure.
history. So I assume then, as you were getting into acting, you guys, you transferred into UCLA.
I did, yeah, because so that community college that I went and took that acting class at, I was like, if I'm gonna keep taking acting classes here, and it's free, because like if you're under a certain income threshold, then they give you tuition for free. Then I was like, I might as well just take all the classes that I can, you know. And so then I did, and like I said, I was majoring in history, so I took a bunch of history classes, but then there was a philosophy requirement. I took a philosophy class, and then I switched my major, got my AA, and then transferred. I had horrible grades in high school, so that would have never happened. But then coming out of community college, I was able to do it.
What in that philosophy class inspired you to switch majors?
I honestly, I think the professor was incredible. It was an online class, even because it was happening during the pandemic, but the professor was just like so passionate about it. And I remember thinking, I thought philosophy would be cool, because like I had heard the term before. People always say, my philosophy is this. The term seemed kind of like airy to me, and I remember thinking, I was like, this seems like such a slam dunk of an A. It seems like such an easy class. I really had no idea what it entailed. And then when I took the class, and we started talking about theory and metaphysics and aesthetics and stuff like that, I was like, oh, this is everything that I'm interested in. Like all the things that I like culminated into one class is just philosophy, because you talk about a ton of history. You get to see it from the lens of people who were like thinking about their worldview was at the time. And I was just always so disinterested in math, and I love science, but science to an extent that you're like, there's just a certain answer. And if there's no answer, then it's like not science. I'm like, that sucks. That's so lame. It's so not fun.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know?
I think getting to, I mean, we talked, I think, on the call before this about how philosophy, I mean, the word itself is like the love of knowledge, love of wisdom. And
Right.
so it really is kind of the study of all things, and everything kind of stemmed from it. Like
Yeah,
all of the great thinkers, even the great, we call them now mathematicians, but at the time, all of them were philosophers. Um,
exactly.
and even like the inventors, like Da Vinci, artists, they were all
Hmm.
philosophers. They studied things and just like loved learning, were obsessed with learning and how the world worked and people interacted
Yeah,
within it. So,
exactly. Like Pythagoras was one of the greatest philosophers of all time, and he invented the Pythagorean theorem. You know,
yeah, because I
all
mean,
these algebraic equations come from times like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's people just trying to make, at least from what we understand of history. And I am curious to kind of pick your brain on how much you believe in like the history we are told versus like how much of it is revisionist. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, like philosophy and all of these theorems about the world, it was just like man trying to make sense of the world he saw around him, right? Like
Exactly. I think that
them,
that's what it still is, honestly, to an extent.
Definitely. I mean, it's why I, or really anyone that I could perceive, would be pushed to study philosophy, read any of the greats, because it's like, okay, I'm experiencing these things that are overwhelming. I have acknowledged the fact that there is something outside of myself and the physical that's going around, whether internally or how I interact with other people. There's something else going on here, and there's got to be other people that have experienced it. And fortunate for many of us, there are some of the greatest minds of all time that put that into books, into writing, that we can go back and kind of study and parse through.
Yeah, I think that that's honestly one of the key sort of defining factors of what makes a good philosopher is there's someone who can take ideas that in some capacity make sense to everybody, and they can package them in a way where it's like, you know what I'm saying? And they're like, yeah, I've never thought about it, or I've thought about that before, but I never knew how to get the idea out. It's somebody who knows how to explain what everybody's thinking. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's why I'm really, really obsessed with words and like writing, because I think like we are literally casting spells on the world around us, other people, our own mindset. And the ability to actually finally articulate what is going on, what you are thinking, what you want to happen, and how to communicate with other people is such a weapon. Like Jordan Peterson talks about it. You know, the internet has their opinions on Jordan Peterson, but he talked about like that is what like the modern man, that's what makes modern man dangerous, is like to be able to like really be extremely articulate, because if not, you can be completely dismantled, whether it's one-on-one or in like a very formal setting in front of a lot of other people. And I mean, ultimately, like as far as the reflection of like internal external world, you have to be able to parse through what is going on inside of your head.
Yes, that's the one thing that I will say has been the greatest takeaway from studying philosophy at a university. Is one, I'll say, like, I don't care if I catch any flack, I'm a huge Jordan Peterson fan. He has incredible ideas. I think he's super well spoken. I actually went and saw him with my brother when he was in LA in November. We went to one of his lectures, and he's just, his, like you said, the learning how to read and write makes you dangerous. It's so true. It's the one thing that's, I think, made me so much more confident in myself, is just knowing that in any situation that I go into any class, into any conversation, into any sort of like, even like a podcast like this, I can go in because with confidence, I know that I'm not going to like get stumped, like not like we're debating each other or anything, obviously, but if it were to come to that, like I have confidence in my own knowledge because I'm able to articulate myself in such a way that I can get my point across. Whereas a lot of people, I think, they don't have the capacity for that, and they also don't really have the desire. They're kind of like, what's the point? Like, who cares what you think? I know what I think, and that's good with me. And I'm like, we're not going to grow then? How's anybody gonna, expand if we don't have the ability to have that sort of discourse with each other?
I agree. And I think it's a unfortunate byproduct of how society is structured. And I think it's intentionally structured like this to kind of cage the human spirit. I think everyone is capable of what you're describing. The problem is from basically the time we're born, with like the education system and many of the other systems that are in place, it's all about highly linear thinking, output or result driven output. Like they want the right answer, they want a specific answer. There's not a ton of back and forth. It is either you just get it right or get it wrong. It's a lot of route memorization. and you move through these like little tunnel boxes through like the formal education, and then you get a job, and it's just, you know, you're putting your pin in the widget factory. Like you know how to do your job and your job only. And like if you were to swap jobs with the dude sitting next to you, the machine would break because neither of you know what the fuck's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's the one thing. I took this so I'm in my third year at UCLA right now, and in the fall I took this skepticism and rationality class. It's a lower division class, which means that freshmen are able to take the class, and non-philosophy majors are able to take the class as like a general education credit. And there were so many freshmen and non-philosophy majors that were kind of reaching out and asking for help, because we're all like we started a group chat with each other, and so many people are asking for help on their papers because they don't know the answer, and they don't know, and I'm like, it's like, you really missed the point if you're looking for the answer, you know what I mean? We'd be talking about Descartes and his meditations, and how, you know, he's kind of having this back and forth with himself about whether or not he can be certain that anything exists, you know? And our professor just very plainly is sort of asking, like, explain his position, and then have a little discourse. Do you agree? What do you think? What does this make you think about? And then people are like, because they compared him to other philosophers, and people are like, what are we supposed, like, what am I supposed to agree with? What is the answer I'm supposed to choose? How am I supposed to go about this question? And it's like the entire point of philosophy, and why I think it's so much cooler than any other subject you could study in school right now, is because there, one, is no answer. Everything is based on your individual way of thinking, and there's no, like, nobody's answer is going to be completely exactly the same. And that's why it's so interesting. That's why you're able to write a paper and you're not able to take an exam, because if these philosophy professors were giving out exams, they wouldn't have any idea what our individual capacity for philosophy or critical thinking is, if you're just answering multiple choices, you know? And people get so used to that going through school, that when it comes time to write a paper and actually put their analysis down, it's like impossible, because nobody ever really taught you that.
Yeah, I mean, I think critical thinking is a skill or a muscle like anything else. It needs to be exercised regularly and put through some serious resistance to be meaningful at all. And by the time you get a kid who's 21 and he really hasn't had to think his entire life, you know, it's like, it's pretty atrophied. It doesn't mean it can't be developed. I mean, it certainly can be. But you gotta feel for the people that haven't really been put through any sort of discourse. I think that was one of the few things that I'm grateful for, going to a very small high school. I graduated with 90 people. So classes were
Wow.
Yeah. Classes were like, you know, anywhere between like 15 to like 25 at the most, kind of. So really, really small, but it encouraged this kind of discourse, at least between, you know, kids that were willing to speak up, like myself. I've never been very conflict averse, so I was always willing to kind of banter with the teachers. In high school I was like very arrogant, so I always was like, I'm smarter than the teachers.
Me too, especially at the end. And I thought it was funny. Like, I thought it was funny because nobody wants to answer questions. So if you speak up and answer and just like have like a regular conversation with the teacher, people are like, what are you doing? Like, shut up. You know?
Yeah. I loved playing that game though, because it was, I think I saw through the illusion of, I guess, adulthood in general. Like, they're just older kids. Like, everyone's pretending that they have it figured out, but it becomes very apparent that no one does, and they just continue to make decisions in a very linear way, and time goes on, and figuring it out is just kind of like moving through life without dying. So like, yeah, I loved talking to teachers kind of as equals, not in a disrespectful manner. At least I tried not to be, but it definitely really was frame altering, definitely for the other kids. But even some of the teachers, you know, obviously they're not used to being spoken to like that. And the ones that could really handle that smoke really respected me for it. But, you know, some of the other ones that got into teaching for more of an egoic pursuit, like a me above them kind of thing, it really caused a lot of friction. And I was never a troublemaker, but it's funny, I ended up getting into a lot of trouble just for like kind of using my brain.
Yeah, because you were, you were going against the grain. You were just doing something that was not necessarily expected of you, even though they might tell you like, we want you to contribute, we want you to, pitch in, give us your ideas. um that was one of the things that I noticed, was like, I had some great teachers in high school that I like still try my best to keep in touch with to this day, because they just like totally shaped my view of education and what a good meaningful education was. And same with my community college professors. I had great ones, and at the same time I had some who you could tell were just there to sort of like flaunt their views and get you to agree with them. I had this English teacher that would give us these like super hot button social issues and would give us papers to write, but the direction of the paper was already decided for us. It was like, give me a paper in favor of XYZ, And then it was like, so I don't get to sort of like throw any analysis. You basically just want me to research your point and then agree with you, you know? And it was like not only such a drag, but it's like you realize it is a little bit of programming, because even though like I'm reading the research for this paper and I'm like, I don't agree with this, I'm still reading this research and it's getting ingrained in my brain that this is what's happening and this is the way to think and this is what's correct. And then you write it, like you said, you're like you're casting spells when you write things. And so I realized I'm typing up this paper, and even though I don't agree with it, something's going on in my brain where I'm like, oh my, like you could tell they're trying to indoctrinate you into this belief,
Yeah, dude. It's crazy like the layers that are in there because I actually live currently with one of my roommates, his long-term girlfriend like lives with
Mm-hmm.
him and she teaches kids and so she's a fourth grade teacher. So not really like high level stuff as far as curriculum, but even
Sure.
that stuff like I know she's a great girl and I know she cares a lot about our kids and like is only
Mm-hmm.
in the field and out of love and like wanting to help them, but like she is given the, Common Core public school curriculum to like give on to these kids and
Yeah.
she's like shown us and been like look at how we have to teach them math, look at how we have to teach them X, Y, and Z. And she's like, look, if I had a choice I wouldn't do it. And the word like the fact that she doesn't even have the liberty to teach how she wants, not only
Mm-hmm.
what but like in methodologies, it's so broken and it goes above the people participating in the system, right? Like it's not to villainize the teachers, but it's something
Right.
higher than that. And it's crazy how it's kind of like generational trauma almost, where like if it never gets addressed, it just continues to get passed down through levels. So like those teachers were also educated in the broken system that they're now re-educating people in. And
Yeah, so they're just used to it, and so everybody's used to it and nobody really like stands up against it. And then when you finally do have someone who is willing to stand up against it, they're usually in the extreme minority, and so nobody listens or pays attention or does anything about it.
what do you think is I think about this a lot, like, because I,
Mhm.
I really try to avoid being the guy that's always like complaining and like anti-establishment and contrarian, even though
Yeah, me
like
too.
I have problems with many of the systems. I try not to complain unless I can purport a solution. But I
Right.
really don't know as far as like these really ingrained systems, like the educational system or really like modern programming in general, how it
Mhm.
goes. How do people affect change? Like what do you look at? Is that something that you see changing? Can it be done?
Yeah, well, like, so I think, kind of cliche answer, but social media, I think that any time that you can just spread awareness about something, you're going to make a difference. Um, Seed oils, I never heard of seed oils until I saw Solbra post something and it showed up on my explore page when I was, you know, it was during the pandemic. So I was like 21 years old, and just a couple years ago. And now it's like this gigantic issue. People, I just saw somebody the other day made an app where you could like track which restaurants use seed oils and which don't. Like, it's becoming a huge thing that people are paying attention to now. Even my mom sent me a video the other day about like how canola oil is made. And it's something that I think people just like kept making memes about it. People kept spreading awareness about it, just talking about it, just making fun of it on social media. And then it became a point where everybody knew what it was. Like, even the people who don't listen to it and still consume seed oils regularly, they know about it. Everybody's heard about it now. And I think that that's the one way that change gets made, is just making people know about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that like the democratization of information just being spread is a very, it is a force for freedom. But that being said, you also have to, and I'm sure you would agree with the fact that like the people running the apps, running the pages, like especially running formal media, you know, they're in control and
they
they're
have control over that.
Right. So I'm curious, how do you discern? I actually was just on a podcast and was asked a similar question. So I'm curious how you discern and intentionally separate signal from noise, and like really try to just use your social media to, I guess, be a positive force for yourself, and discern what is kind of just like, because even the seed oils thing, I could almost see this being like our generation's like trans fat or cholesterol. You know what I mean? Like, because I want to believe it. Like, I want to, like, a lot of it makes sense. A lot of people I trust talk about it. And you know, I've cut it out more or less entirely from my diet, except like certain circumstances, eating out, whatever, when I can't really totally control it. But I've noticed health benefits, but I don't know if that's just my brain. Like, is it just the placebo and the power of my mind?
That's the thing, is I think that I just posted something about this on my Instagram the other day. Is like the demonization of like anecdotal evidence or just pure human intuition, for the sake of like research-based science, I think is so horrible. Because I have friends that won't do something unless there's a peer-reviewed study that supports the benefits of it. And I'm like, you don't think that the sun is good for you because it makes your skin tingle and it feels good and you feel happy afterwards? Like, I think that that's fucking good enough for me. You know what I mean? And I think that the way that you parse through that evidence is by having intuition, and just by using your common sense and seeing like, okay, is this something you hear about something and you're like, okay, I don't know whether that's right or wrong. How can I apply this to my life and then test it for myself? So like, that was the one, like for me, when I heard the seed oils thing, for example, I was like, okay, seems cool, seems applicable, like something that I could actually experiment on myself. And then when I realized they were in everything, I was like, maybe I can't actually cut them out and I can't really do something about it. But I was like, let me try my best. So then I stopped using any like cooking oil sprays, and I stopped buying as much processed stuff as I could, using single ingredient foods. And the first thing that I noticed was I stopped sunburning. I would go out in the sun. I would never
it's
I'd
actually
never get
nuts.
a sunburn.
And like, you have Brazilian in you, so like and like darker complexion, so like there's naturally maybe some skepticism, but like I literally have like a ginger beard, blonde hair, like mostly German genes, and like I was the kid growing up that like my parents put us in like swim shirts, lathered us in sunscreen. Like, I burned like a tomato.
Dude, and my dad is Irish German, so I also have the propensity to burn. Like, all throughout, I had this limiting belief that I had such horrible skin. I was like, oh, I got my dad's skin, my brother got my mom's skin, you know? And it's like, because I would burn so bad from just like one day out in the sun that I would get rashes all over my body. I would get sun rashes, like, you know? And so I don't necessarily think that I had the like that's what people tell me now. They're like, oh, you're Brazilian, that's why you can go out in the sun with no sunscreen. I'm like, no dude, I worked for this, you know. Like I cleaned my diet up so much. And I remember coming during COVID, I would come outside with like increasing intensities in the sun for like 15 minutes and then 20 minutes and then 25 minutes. And now it's to where I'm out in the sun 5-6 hours a day with no sunscreen. I don't burn at all. And I 100% attribute it to the fact that I cleaned up my diet and stopped relying on sunscreen. And then like you don't have that, reliant effect.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Because you hear about all the different kind of stuff about kind of these more like based esoteric health concepts, kind of a returning to naturopathic methods. And
Right.
there's an inherent skepticism, and I do kind of want to like, I want to try to not drift because I think that I love this kind of space.
Yeah.
And you touched on something really important, which is like the divorce from intuition. And I will also, by extension, say things that are spiritual and religious. It's been super demonized in our time. Like science is the language of our time. So
Yes.
someone that really impresses me that bridges the gap well is Dr. Joe Dispenza, because
Yeah, 100%.
he's teaching the same things that, Sadhguru and all of these other guys that are very quote unquote woo woo or hippie and spiritual. He's literally saying the same things, but he'll use terms like pineal gland and calcification and neuroendocrine pathways and like stuff that like makes people like they're like, oh yes, science, yes, studies,
Yeah,
yes,
science. Yeah,
data. Like,
correct. Yeah.
but it's the same stuff
This.
it's the same stuff that dudes on carpets in India have been saying for fucking ever, right? Like opening
The
your
only
third
difference is he
eye.
has a study. He's
Right.
got a study that shows, oh, we did X, Y, and Z, and we did research, and we peer reviewed it, and we were able to re-replicate it. And like people, for some reason, eat that shit up. And it's like it's no different than just doing it once and being like, see, look what happened. Look what I did to myself.
I think, yeah, I used to get mad, and I also came from a very technical background. I studied biomedical engineering at university. And so I used to kind of be that person. But what I think is awesome now, and I come to like a much more middle perspective, is that like I said, it's like the language of our time. So if, for instance, a book like the Bible were to be written now, it would have a lot more of those terminologies, right? Like,
For sure.
was it Luke or Matthew that was a doctor? One of the Gospels, one of the disciples of the Gospels was a doctor. And so, like, even in the way that that gospel is written, it's like has kind of medical references and medical type perspective. And so I think if it was written today, it would have a lot more of the technical jargon because it is just how it is written. And so although those older texts are written for the day and age that they were, because they were written by the men that were there, but when we compare and contrast truth with a capital T, we can see that it's telling the same story. And so that's what I like to do now, is that like if I'm looking for source, if I'm looking for genuine truth, like God breathed truth, compare and contrast the things and see how different are they if you can get past the words that they're using. I think Eckhart Tolle does a great job breaking down our attachment to words. Like, I don't know if you've read The Power of Now, but like
I've listened to the first couple chapters.
Yeah, and like in those first couple chapters, he spends most of the time talking about like, okay, I'm gonna use X, Y, and Z term, like I'm gonna call it God, or I think he calls it the all. But he's saying like use whatever term speaks to you or makes sense to you, but know it and feel it that it's the same, and you will have experienced it. And then he goes into explain all of the power of presence and everything like that. But yeah, it's like we talked about before, like the whatever word floats your boat, whatever word kind of speaks to your soul. That's how the message can get into you and communicate with us. But it doesn't mean that when you hear it in other words, you should villainize it and demonize it as non-truth or some sort of other falsity or like hereticism.
It's like I have this thing where I joke that I think everybody believes in God, and I think that some people just don't want to. They don't like the term God. That's 100% true. A lot of people don't like the word God. A lot of people don't like that God is he, or they don't like the like pronouns for God. Or some people just don't like the fact that there is like one single thing that you can sort of define. People like to call it the universe because it's like all encompassing, and there's no face on the universe. Like, it's just kind of this, you know, uncomprehensible entity. And I think that the reason that people like that so much is it takes a little bit of the burden off of you. You're not like trying to necessarily please the universe or have a relationship with the universe. You know, the universe is not going to be upset or jealous or angry or, you know, anything like that. And I think that it's this thing where we all kind of like understand these same concepts, where it's like, there, even if you believe in the Big Bang, or if you believe in the 7-day creation, like, does not matter. You know that everything came from somewhere, whether or not you're willing to concede that it all happened at a moment, snap of the fingers, or it was over hundreds of millions of years of gas condensing, whatever it is. You know, it came from somewhere. It had to have, you know, and that makes sense to everybody. But the definitions that we use and the way that we define these things, I think that that's the difference, you know, is like, you can say that God created the Big Bang, or you could say that God created Adam and Eve. You could say the same thing using the terms the universe or a source or creator. It all means the same thing. And I think that people like to get hung up on definitions, and they like to get hung up on semantics, because you can distance yourself from the conversation and be like, we're not talking about the same thing. And it's like, no, come back here. We are talking about the exact same thing, you know?
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I do want to pick your brain now, given that I believe you are a Christian based on the content you do put out there. So why were you raised Christian all the way through, and then why have you remained with that specific, I guess, religious structure, given that you have sort of this more, I guess, broad and forgiving perspective on God and on creation? I kind of want to hear where your head is at with that, because I was raised Christian. I no longer consider myself within that religion, but I don't know that I've fully divorced from a lot of those initial core beliefs. And I definitely believe that there is God breathed or source breathed truth in the Bible for sure. It's potentially one of the best books ever written.
Agreed.
So I want to hear a little bit about like your kind of choice to be a Christian and how that all plays into your beliefs.
So yeah, I did grow up in a Christian household. My mom was raised, you know, Latin Catholic in Brazil, and my dad was raised Irish Catholic. And he was like forced to go to church. You know, he was raised like in the church. And then when he turned 18, he didn't want to go to a Catholic church anymore, because he just didn't really like align with their views. He was still a Christian, still believed in God and everything, but just kind of saw that the church was a little bit not what he was aligned with. And so then he started going to just like non-denominational, like Presbyterian, Protestant churches, whatever. And him and my mom would go, and my brother and I would go when we were little, but it was never something that they forced us to do. And my parents split up when I was 7 or 9, 8, 9, around then. And then, you know, they kind of stopped going to church, and I was never forced to go to church. My dad would go every once in a while, and he'd be like, hey, you want to come? And I'd be like, yeah, why not? You know? And I think I always like would tell people ask me, I'd say, yeah, I believe in God, you know, I believe in Jesus. I had no idea what it meant though. And I think it wasn't until I was 19 that I really decided, I was like, I should probably read the Bible for myself and figure out what I actually believe. And that's kind of when everything started happening for me, because my dad died when I was 19. And I think that sort of like shock of a situation is what sort of sent me down this path of, I was like, oh shit, I need to know what happens next, what happens after we die. I had always kind of told myself these like platitudes, like, yeah, we're all gonna be in heaven, I'm gonna see him again one day. But I was like, I need to actually know for my own, peace of mind what happens after we die. And my search became a lot different, because once I started reading the Bible and I started realizing that there was like a story and a narrative to everything, and it wasn't so much like just this book of like rules how to live and like these platitudinal messages and stuff like that. I became extremely fascinated by it, because I was like, whoa, this tells, like, I started with the New Testament. I read Matthew through Revelation first, and then I went back and started reading the Old Testament. And then once I started getting to like the prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel and stuff, I started realizing, I was like, this is all it's all one long continuous story that's just like pointing to Jesus, that's just talking about Jesus. And I was like, okay, so everything that I read about Jesus is really cool, and I agree with everything that was said. And now I'm reading the Old Testament, and it's all connecting, it's all making sense. Now the only thing for me to figure out is whether or not Jesus existed, and whether or not this story is like reliable. You know what I mean? And I sort of used like my own uh like I said, I rely on like anecdotal evidence and my own intuition, but I do still respect science. And like, if there's any way to show proof for something, then like all the better, right? I hate the idea that people are like, oh, you can't rely on evidence. It's like, why? It exists, you know. And so then once I would just do more research on like, okay, did Jesus die? Yeah, he definitely died. Did he exist? He existed more than any person in history has ever existed, right? Like, we have more evidence for his existence than we do the existence of people like Alexander the Great and like Augustus Caesar. There's more documentation that Jesus existed than there is for them. And then the reliability of the eyewitnesses that saw Jesus after his resurrection is like the next thing that's called into question. But then it falls into that same category of like, what else in history is just as reliable? And I think that that's sort of where the evidence starts to like trail off. We know for a fact Jesus existed. We know for a fact Jesus died. And we know to the best of our ability that he was seen by 1,000 people after his death to have been walking around, like revealed himself and spoke and talked to the 12. And you can argue that they were biased in one direction or another, but it's like the fact that we changed our entire calendar to fit the day that Jesus, or the year that Jesus was born, to be the way that we track time from now on. And the fact that Christianity was an illegal pursuit for the first 350 years of its existence, and still somehow managed to become the world's largest religion, is like, to me, it's all these things that just like gives me chills. It's like, how the fuck did this all happen? It's insane. It's insane that it came to this point. And for me, the biggest thing was I had like real experiences with God, like hearing his voice. And I remember one day, kind of the most vivid experience that I had. And this is a little bit, it's like sometimes when I tell people this story, they think it's really cool or they think it's really corny. So, I was at my girlfriend at the time's house, and she lived in Lake Arrowhead, so it's kind of like, you're in the mountains. It's here in California, and it's a little bit, kind of, you're more in solitude. You feel a little bit closer to God. And I was just kind of starting my endeavor into spirituality and Christianity, and it was a few months after my dad died, and I remember I was just like crying with her, talking about how much I miss my dad. And she was also, religious, and spiritual, and she was like, you know, let's pray about it. Let's just pray to God, see how you feel, see what happens. And so we started praying, and I tried talking and I just couldn't get any words out. And then she started praying for me. And then I remember we were sitting in her bed, and then she kind of just like shook me to like open my eyes, and she was like, look. And she pointed at her bathroom wall, and the light shining through the like dead tree branches in the winter in Lake Arrowhead just happened to cast this shadow on the wall that looked like the like perfect artistic depiction of what you would imagine Jesus's face looked like, you know? And it was the wildest thing, like took the air out of my lungs, was so freaky. And I remember just staring at it and kind of like looking at her, looking back, and we were just like sitting there in amazement. And then I was like, I need to take a picture of this. So I tried to find my phone to try and take a picture of it, and none of the pictures were coming out on my phone. Like nothing was, it just looked like a regular, you know, shadow of nothing. But then I'd look at it with my eyes and I would see Jesus. And then like after a few minutes, the image just kind of started fading. And then I remember looking out in the trees and like trying to figure out like how this could have happened. But it's just one of those things where it's like, when you try and reason and you try and just like evidence the shit out of everything, you lose the magic of what it is. You know what I mean? Yeah, that was just the first experience that I had where I was like, I couldn't explain what was happening and I didn't get it. And it sat with me for a long time. And I think that was the first time that I realized there's more to just like reading the Bible and just like researching the evidence of Jesus. It's like having that real relationship where it's like, I didn't realize I could actually see him or like hear his voice, which is something that has happened in the past as well, is like discerning. It's like, was that my own thought that I just had, or did I literally just hear God's voice, you know?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Dude, I listened to an Aubrey Marcus podcast recently, and he was talking about how we kind of in the modern times, modern West, especially with all of this love of science, science as God, we kind of have not left room for miracles to happen anymore. Because like when you read the Bible, you see all this like the miracles happening seemingly at this like semi-regular pace, and you go across like all of these other famous religious texts and historical texts throughout time. There are these similar types of events of these healers, these prophets bringing, you know, healing lame people, bringing blind, like curing blindness, doing all of these sorts of miraculous events. But it is because of the layers of beliefs that we have in our mind that maybe those things are no longer possible. But it was at those times, it was commonly understood that things like that could happen. There was an openness of the mind of the people, like collective consciousness, that things like miracles could happen. And nowadays we call miracles the placebo effect. Like
that, yeah, true.
I mean, it's what we've characterized it at. We gave it this gross scientific name, and literally we write our studies in science to discount or cut out the, you know, pieces of evidence that include placebo. So we have control groups and we have all these things just to account for the power of our mind to create miracles, right? Like literally you tell someone that they're healthy and then they become healthy.
Right.
And on all the data, and we're like, the classic placebo, like, let's figure out what pill we can make.
Oh my God, that is so interesting. I had never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
It's a really beautiful characterization because it's kind of ties back into the beginning of what we were talking about, where science is the language of our time. People are a lot more comfortable hearing the term placebo than they are miracle. But when we can look at a study and they intentionally basically were testing the placebo in this one study. They had this one guy had multiple malignant cancerous tumors, like 7 of them. They were like about the size of oranges. in his body, and it was terminal. And at the time, they didn't have a treatment for it. So what they did as part of this study is basically the doctor told him that they were going to give him an experimental treatment that was 100% effective in all of the studies so far, but it just hadn't been broadly released. And he's like, I'll try anything. Mm-hmm. They gave it to him. It was like a saline injection, basically. It was like a pseudo treatment. And within a few weeks, all of the tumors disappeared. And then, like weeks down the line, after he was declared fully in remission, there was some sort of like news article that got released. And basically it said that this experimental treatment was a fraud. It was part of this study. And within like 2 short weeks, all of the tumors reappeared. And so
wow,
shortly after that, his specific practitioner, when he came back in, was like, hey, it didn't work. The guy was like, no, those studies were falsified. They were funded by blah, blah, blah. And then short weeks after that, all the tumors were gone again, and he was in full remission. And all of this is like the power of the belief. It's like the power of the mind. And these are miracles. These are modern miracles. For anyone to say that it's anything less is to deny the ability of beauty and magic to be in your life. And it's fine. Like I'm not gonna proselytize to somebody who wants to call it placebo, who wants to live this rigid, cold, like fluorescently lit scientific life. Yeah. But I just think that like when you kind of open your eyes a little bit and are okay acknowledging that there's a little bit of magic out there, you start to see the magic out there.
100%. And I think that there's no like, I have to imagine that everybody wants that in their life, right? Like, why would you not? And I think that some people are just so sort of nihilistic, and they feel like the world is so not magical, and they think that there can't possibly be that. And I think that that's the thing that causes so much hatred amongst people, is they see other people sort of using this magic to their advantage, and they're like, why does this person have everything that I want? And I don't. And it's like, well, you don't think it's real. You don't think it's possible for you. Like this example of the guy with his health, like he just believed that he could become healthy, and he was able to. And then as soon as he believed that he wasn't, then he wasn't anymore. He was creating his own reality, whether it be by the power of science or by the power of God, the power of his own mind, whatever you want to call that. It's like, people just don't believe that magic is real and possible. And I think that there is like a strong correlation between opening yourself up to miracles and allowing them to happen and them actually happening. Because like if you look at like the biblical stories, nobody in the Bible was healed just for no reason. People would come and be like, Jesus, I believe in you. I think that you can actually do this. And he's like, yeah, guess what? You're right. And then he would do it. Nobody was just like, oh, what the hell happened to me? Oh, was it you? Like, nobody gets healed on accident. You have to believe that you can be. And then it happens.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it goes to a lot of the stuff that we talked about, like the projection, like all is mind. And like when you have that control over your mind, like people can shit on visualization, manifestation, but every single successful person talks about it, and they may use different words for it, but like it is very, very evidently clear that belief, that intrinsic belief, has to come before even the action to get there, because somewhere before the action, you have to believe deeply inside that I am someone who's capable and deserving of the result if I take those actions. Like fitness 100%. Is always like a very clear example where if you're very, very out of shape, a lot of people will be like, you need to build the evidence to trust. Like just start going to the gym, you'll see the results, and then you'll continue. But ultimately, to even step in the gym, you have to believe that if I eat healthier and do the exercise, I will change my body. And because there's so many cases of it, and it is broadly like understood in the collective consciousness that exercise and good eating makes you healthy, it becomes the reality. But things that require these layers of quote unquote faith, like maybe something more airy-fairy like manifestation, bringing things like a partner or money, attracting those things into your life, if you believe it, it literally just starts happening. It's insane. And
Yeah.
the people that condemn it, like, you just won't be able to ever experience it, which is kind of the sad reality, because it's like a self-fulfilling feedback
Prophecy.
loop.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's when you do open that like your mind up to it, it becomes this kind of really beautiful, magical space.
It's one of those things too where people, like, those same people who believe that those things can't exist, they just chalk all the every time it does accidentally happen to them, they chalk it up to coincidence. They're just like, oh, that's so odd that that would happen. Isn't that so cool that that would happen that way? It's like, yeah, it's actually fucking unbelievable. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, we throw that word around so much, like it's unbelievable. It's incredible. You know, it's like we're using these terms to define things that absolutely make no logical sense to us. And because they don't make any logical sense to us, we just chalk them up to the doesn't make sense category. And it's like, doesn't make sense, that exists. It's like, why are you allowing it to have no meaning in your life? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
If every single thing has a purpose and every single thing has a meaning, why do some random occurrences, random, have no meaning? It all has meaning.
exactly. And people, like, in this very science-based world, faith is condemned. Like,
Mhm.
if you're a faith-based person, like you practice religion, like you're somehow less than, or like you're maybe not that intelligent, or whatever. And I heard it all, especially from like being raised in Christian education and then
Mhm.
transitioning to a very technical world-class university. You couldn't like talk about having a faith. I wasn't particularly involved with my faith in college, but the kids that would go to church, like, and the way that people would look at and talk about those kids, it was just like a very condemnation. But all of life is operating on a faith-based, everything requires faith. Like, the
Yep.
decisions you're making today, like if I were to find like a very highly skeptical, highly scientific person, like, they would probably spend their day, maybe they work in a research lab, so they're sitting there spinning cultures, like examining them under a microscope, doing all these data sets. Like, okay, what did you do today? Well, they walk me through the process. Why did you do it? Well, because like at the end of this, in 6 weeks, we'll have all this data that we can put into a study and determine the efficacy of this drug. Okay, fine, but what you did today is assuming that there is a tomorrow for you to go in and study the cultures tomorrow and the next day. That is a presupposition of faith. You don't
Mhm.
know that that's going to happen for you and
Yeah.
for this study tomorrow. The building could burn down. You could be struck dead by a car. So
Yeah.
life intrinsically requires faith. You have to somehow believe that there is an extension of your reality beyond the present moment to be able to plan for this potential of the future. And so people that like to believe into some sort of future past life, that becomes like way too far. It's like, okay, you're extending way too far. Like you're
Mhm.
using all this faith, like you're crazy religious. But I just don't see it as that much of a logical leap. And I think if people really were less married to the words, less married to this like us versus them dichotomy,
Yes.
there could be so much more of a healthy and magical discourse.
I think that that would be the one thing that could help so many people, is realizing that we are talking about the same thing and we believe in the same thing. Like like you just said, the idea of you have to have faith that your car's even going to start when you put the key in it, you know? It very well might not, but you have faith that it's going to. And it happens so regularly that I think people don't realize the significance of it, of how much faith they're using on a daily basis. And if you were able to take that, like, ultimate faith that you have, that when you get in the car it's not going to explode every single day, and you're able to put it into something else, like the belief that you you know you might transcend this life when you die, like, that's so powerful. That's insane. It's unbelievable. It's incredible. It's those all these words that we keep using to try and explain things that don't make sense to us. And it's like, obviously if there's so many things in this world that we can't explain and that don't make sense to us, there has to be something to them. There has to be a reason for them, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, with all of this being said, I am curious, like, why you still continue or choose to practice within the Christian faith, and then what is your
Mm-hmm.
perspective on other, popular zeitgeist world religions like in Islam or Judaism or something like that? Like, do you believe that they are also purporting the same kind of truth with a capital T?
I I feel like I'm still sort of on my journey with this understanding, because I know that there's so many different sort of schools of belief within Christianity. And I will just say that from the get-go, like, I don't consider myself a religious person. I'm not a part of any church. I've been to many different churches throughout my life, but I just consider myself a follower of Jesus. And the reason for that is everything that I've learned about Jesus has made so much sense to me. And I've never, like, it's all something that I can get behind. It's all something that makes sense to me just intuitively, intrinsically. The things that, if Jesus is who he says he is, then he is God. And if that's who God is, then that's who I want to follow. And that's sort of like my thinking. You know what I mean? It's like Jesus says the things that I agree with. Jesus says that he is God, therefore I am a believer in God, right? So that's sort of the basic equation for me. When it comes to other religions, I think it's sort of something along the same lines of the spiritualists who don't want to give God a face or a name. They want to chalk everything up to the universe, sort of divine consciousness, source, intelligence, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. And I think that we're all just using different words. And with that being said, I feel like there's a lot of, this is probably one of the things that I've struggled with the most, because one of the things that I get challenged on the most is like, what if there's this kid in India who grew up, Hindu, and he was super devout and believed in God, or his gods, his whole life, and he never really got a chance to like know Jesus that well. Like, he had heard of Jesus, but he never got the chance to fully know him or understand him. What happens to that kid when he dies? Or what about all the people who lived thousands of years before, Christ was alive? What about the people who only lived to be 5 years old and never got a chance to understand what was going on in the world around them? I think that there is a lot more, I don't want to say leeway, but I think that God's ways are so great and so inconceivable to us that we can't possibly, like, we can't even possibly begin to banter over what happens to those people, what happens to the non-believers, what happens to the people who never found their way. I know in some schools of Christianity, the thought is that the the people who are going to heaven were chosen to go to heaven from the beginning, and the people that are going to hell were chosen to go to hell from the beginning. And to me, if God is a just and loving God, it seems odd for him to choose who's going to win and who's going to lose from the get-go.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where I draw the line is I feel like it is very clear when you have a very when you use your intuition to make decisions on God, religion, and what is true and what is belief.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty obvious where the line becomes drawn between what God said and what a man wrote, and the layers that they constructed a religion around as a control mechanism. Because once you start to gatekeep things like heaven and consciousness and paradise, once you start to
gatekeep, yeah, exactly.
yeah, once you gatekeep that based on behavior, based on contribution to the church, based on some sort of way of life, that's when it's like, okay, that was clearly a group of human beings that wanted to control people,
Corrupt. Right.
like lord eternity over somebody's head so that they make consistent donations to a church or whatever. And so those are my, I guess, general criticisms with these like bigger buckets of religion. And so I'm always very skeptical of like religion, but I do think that these faiths have, all of them have their truths within them. And yeah, like given the fact that I was raised in Christianity, you know, I asked that question to you knowing all of the like canned apologetics answers for that, and those, even the questions that you were being posed, like I know what, if I were to ask like a Christian teacher what they would say about the people that were never exposed to it, the people that were young, the people that didn't choose him but heard him, like all that different stuff. And what's crazy is like you said, the different schools of thoughts even within Christianity, especially like Catholicism specifically, gets pretty strict on some of that stuff. But to me, it's
very
like
much so.
it becomes like so evident, like, okay, clearly like men had their hand here, like humanity came in and started creating a lot of these rule sets, which it's sad to see, because I think like very devout Catholics and very devout Christians, like it is super like honorable and respectable to see somebody kind of devote their life to a school of belief and like have that be so core to their identity, and like have a moral framework. It's better than the kind of degenerate world we live in where it's like everyone is everything to everything and you just do whatever you want and like pursue hedonism, which I think is fucking haram. But like I think that like it's tough because the pendulum swings too far the other way in many of those cases where it becomes like highly rigid, and we're all like missing the point. Like listen to the words of Jesus. Like he just sat in the tall grass and talked to like with his boys. Like he was like, you know, the vibes when things are right. And I don't know. I think people.
That's exactly my point about using your intuition. It's like, you know, that's correct. I had some guy in my DMs the other day asking me like, how do we know if we can trust our intuition? Like how that's the reason that we need scientific studies. And it's like, do you not trust your intuition? And he's like, oh, no, I don't trust the intuition of like a drug user. And it's like, okay, well, they're not in a healthy state because they're using drugs. So yeah, maybe they shouldn't trust their intuition. It's like, we weren't created to alter our minds that much. Like it's like you said, you just know that Jesus was sitting in the grass with his boys and he was just talking to them and he was like, guys, this is the way that things should be. And it's like, yeah, we all agree with you. Everybody agrees. Everybody should love their neighbor. Like if you don't believe that you should love your neighbor as you love yourself, if that doesn't make sense to you, you're psychotic. Like you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense to me that we would have been able to exist for as long as we have if that wasn't our fundamental understanding.
Yeah. And the intuition thing, it's very synchronistic that it has come up and been such like a through line of this podcast, because it continues to come up in many of my conversations, both on and off recordings, where it's so like I think of intuition and like artists call it like divine inspiration. There's a lot of different names for it, but like these moments where you have like this out of body feeling, but you sense like some sort of deep truth or deep I have to do X, Y, and Z, or I came up with an idea, but I don't know where it came from. Like I literally think that is like God speaking to us. And it's it obviously, because it is God or source or creation or whatever, it's never wrong. And I put out a tweet like, your intuition is literally never wrong. You either just misheard it or chose not to listen. And
I love that.
A huge thing is like in relationships, like ignoring red flags. Like, you know, right off the bat, pretty much whether somebody's going to be good or bad for you. And it could be even non-romantic relationships. Like somebody walks in the room, you can sense within a few minutes of speaking to someone, their intentions, whether or not they're there as like transactional or they're actually trying to make you feel seen, feel heard, connect with you as a human being. and are just more interested in getting to know you and kind of creating an environment of interaction, as opposed to like, what can I get out of this person? Who do they know? How can they connect me? How can I make money off of them?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, like I think like our sense of like authenticity with other people, our ability to like perceive that in other people, that is like
Hmm.
outside of ourselves. It's definitely outside of the rational mind. And
I think it's the thing that like allowed us to develop as humans, is just that ability to interact with each other, because like nobody's going to be able to survive by themselves. Like we're pack animals. We exist in tribes, we exist in communities. That's how we evolved for so long. And so that's like it makes sense that our intuition would be the sort of like strongest thing about us, the thing that makes us the most human, I think.
definitely. And that's another thing where I love also learning about evolutionary psychology. I don't know if you listen to Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson, but he studies
I
a lot of
haven't.
that stuff. Excellent podcast. And yeah, no, I think it's like he speaks a lot in the scientific. He brings on a lot of researchers, all these things. Um, and it's awesome to hear all that stuff. And it tells again a lot of the same story. Like they might call it different types of things about like our tribal nature, our ability to sense and communicate with other people. Like we have these heightened
Hmm.
abilities with our prefrontal cortex and blah blah blah. But it ultimately is like that intuition, and they're not telling different stories. They're just using different words.
Right. Exactly.
But
Yeah.
what
Evolutionary psychology is one thing that I've always thought was super interesting, and I think it answers a lot of questions. And I think that it gets a lot of flack from both sides, because you have the group of people that don't believe in evolution. Um, and then you also have the group of people that don't like to chalk anything up to like human diversity and genetics, and they want to believe that everything is a product of their environment. You know what I mean? And it's like some things are just kind of unexplainable. Like you can't really explain why a baby has like a fear of heights if it's never fallen from a building before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Those
an
things
interesting
like that.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, there is some sort of like ubiquity to the human experience, and I think that um, babies are the closest to like divine as we are
Hmm.
ever going to experience in our lives, because there's no
Yes.
layers of agreements, programming,
Hmm.
like there's nothing that has tainted that soul, that spirit, that mind, or
Right.
even the body. And it's immediately, once brought into this world, it's like layers of whatever indoctrination, and everybody has different levels of it. Some people go through much more arduous traumas, some people have pretty steady upbringings, all these different things. But you can look, I think there's so much you could look at intuitively at like a child and how they operate, and learn
Hmm.
about how maybe to live a much more optimal life, whether it's how they physically move their bodies, how they sit, how they squat, how they walk,
How they
or
eat.
yes, how they eat, how they even try to communicate.
Hmm.
And then the fact that they're such emotional uh tuning rods, like they're very emotionally intuitive and connected to the energies.
Yeah.
Like they can
No
sense
kid,
when the
and they
parents are
tell the
angry.
truth too. They
Yeah.
tell the truth every single time. Like if you're like mean, like a kid will just be like, "You're mean." If you're weird, a kid's just gonna be like, "You're weird." You know, they don't have any sort of filter like that. Like they exist in such a pure state. And I think that that's like yeah, like you said, we can learn so much just by looking back at kids and just seeing the way that they operate. um it'd be interesting if you could have like a really deep sort of like spiritual conversation with a kid. I don't know a lot of like 5 year olds in my life that I could have this conversation with, but it'd be really interesting to see what they would think about all this.
Yeah, no, that would be such a fun or funny podcast to like sit down with like literally a child, and
Literally a
and just be
child.
like, what do you think happens when we die?
Yeah, just to the best of your knowledge, what do you think?
Yeah, but like I would hope that you could find a kid that hadn't been like told some sort of canned answers, because you would hate to hear them say like, well, dad says this or mom says this. Like
Yes,
I would
exactly.
love to like kind of like pry and also like have fun kind of playing with their struggle
Different ideas.
to well, yes, but like their struggle to articulate them, because I think they haven't been given a lot of those mental weapons, the words to
Right.
say, but somewhere
Hmm.
in there is like this like really deep truth. So if you kind of just like slowly coax it out of them, I think it'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why it's, it's such a, I feel like the times that you do give kids the benefit of the doubt and you really hear them out, you can learn a lot because, man, sometimes listening to stories from 6-year-olds is painful. They're so bad at telling stories, and they just, everything's all over the place, and, nothing's concise, nothing's matching up. They're repeating themselves a lot. But then once you get to the end of the story, they might say something really profound about like how that experience changed them. And you're like, wow, I did not think that you were going to circle back to this, but that's pretty cool, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be fair, we've also been rather circuitous with this podcast. I don't know that it has any directionality.
Yeah,
But
no, definitely not. But
it's been good. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of like really interesting and powerful stuff. I do want to so unfortunately we haven't narratively found ourselves to my I always ask my guests 3 questions before we leave, but before I get to those questions, I wanted to ask if there was anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about, or maybe something you wish I had asked you about.
no, I sort of wanted to know more from like your upbringing, like what led you to wanting to start this podcast, because I think that it's such a cool idea, and I think it's one of the like best things that we can do is kind of have like these long form discussions with each other. And I think that this is one of the best ways to like spread information too, to spread awareness to people. And so I kind of wanted to know like where you got the idea to do this, because this is something that I don't know if I've ever had like the sort of wherewithal to start my own podcast, but to be on a podcast like this, I think is so cool.
Yeah, 100%. And I do appreciate you coming on. And I mean, like, I love, I mean, the bar none, the best byproduct of starting the podcast or starting a podcast for anyone is like the ability to have the excuse to connect with really interesting people and then sit long form with them. And it's unfortunate maybe that we need to get to the place that like you have the guise of a podcast or like the framework to like sit down and
Right.
have these conversations. But the positive byproduct is that it gets recorded and you can share it with the world so that other people can expand and grow from it. And I've learned
Exactly.
so much from podcasts and continue to do so, that it's cool to now be in the arena producing and like pushing back some of the lessons that I have, and ruminating on the thoughts of like what is life, what is self-mastery, and what are the
Hmm.
lessons I'm learning and how can that help other people. So I mean, to answer it directly, I was building, it was an encouragement of some of my mentors when I was trying to build out what I built with the Vitruvian Man program.
Hmm.
And my listeners would be familiar, but he they were saying that like, and I think it's definitely the lowest barrier to entry type of content you could put out to start putting your thoughts into the world. And then as far as like clipping it into short form, it gives you a lot of material that's just out into the world. People can start to
Yeah.
understand your mindset, who you are, what you think. um but it has really evolved, it definitely within my personal perception, into something that is very formless. I really just want to connect with very fascinating people and pick their brains. It's as much a vehicle for me to share my thoughts, like when I do my solo episodes, as it is for me to learn about the world and about other people. Like sitting down with someone like you and just picking your brain. Like literally, you've lived an entire 23 years, just like myself, but they've been entirely different 23 years. So you've accumulated all of these experiences. And so
Right.
why not just 2x my lifespan by like really digging deep into like how you've lived,
Yeah.
and doing that over and over and over and over with people of all ages and all lifespans and all creeds, all places of the world. It's just like reading in that way, where you're kind of expanding yourself into other lives and living a million lifetimes or as many as you can to try to get closer to what is source, what is truth,
Right.
in general, and in different arenas of life, right? Like I could have on like a health expert and figure out, okay, what are all these healthy people talking about consistently? Like what is what are the fundamentals? What is the truth? And then one of the questions I ask everybody on this podcast, because it's generally targeted towards men. My product is a men's self-development program, is like,
Mhm.
what in your eyes, what defines being a man, which I guess will prompt you with now. But what's awesome is to like ask similar questions over and over and over again and hear all of those answers. And you start to, if you pay attention, divorce from the
Pick the
words.
best of each. Yeah.
Yeah. You start to see like, what is the actual answer that everyone is saying, whether they say it differently or not. So
Right.
I will now lob that question to you. I know it's off topics, I suppose, from the conversation we've had, but I am curious.
Not at all. We're talking about everything. What it means to be a man.
In your eyes, what defines being a man?
In my eyes, what defines being a man, other than the biological necessities, is sort of the pursuit of being the best possible, like, provider. And how can I put this? Like, when I think of what it means to be a man, I think of a guy who does things sort of like with integrity. And I think of doing everything in your life, like whether that be starting a family, starting a business, trying to find your purpose in life, just doing everything with like intensity and integrity. Because I feel like that's the thing that a lot of people, whenever they're trying to pursue something, whether it be a relationship or a job or whatever it might be, they lack so much intensity, and they have no like burning desire to get to the end of the rainbow, and like see what's waiting for them on the other side, that it's just sort of like, why do you think that if all these people are pushing hard as fuck, that like you're going to be able to do it with your like kind of lackluster attitude? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think just like that intensity and that aggression, that desire to succeed, and then acting on it, I think that that's kind of what makes a man. And I think that that's like when we see something and we say like, oh, that's manly, is something that just kind of has that like direct, no bullshit sort of attitude towards something.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really, I like that answer. It's definitely different in some ways to the answers that I have heard, but the through line, like integrity is an important one, and consistently across the board, like everyone always says like a man is someone who does what he says he's going to do, and that's what
Yeah.
integrity is. Like you're a man of your word.
Yeah.
And I think that's so critical. And then just speaking on like the masculine energy, it is overcoming, it's achieving, it's like going out into the world, it's penetrating, and that is kind of what you're kind of explaining, like choosing whatever your definition of success is and like driving towards it with intensity.
Right.
I really do love that.
And I think to kind of expand on that a little bit, I think that keeping your word and like telling the truth in all things is, I think, more valuable than anything else in the world. I truly feel like, we kind of talked about a little bit on the phone a while ago about Hollywood, and how there's a lot of obviously actors in Hollywood. And there's people who say things that maybe they don't mean, or some things that they don't believe. And if it's outside of the realm of just pure entertainment, where they're trying to like maybe push an agenda that they don't actually believe in, I think that that's where I draw the line on like, you're not being a man, you're not manning up, you're not owning up to your word, you're not telling the truth, you're not being genuine. And that's not something that I know that I would ever allow for myself. And that's why like I feel comfortable talking about like anything that's sort of occurring in the space of like entertainment or in Hollywood, because I mentioned this on Case Bradford's podcast about how like the sort of like super ultra liberal Hollywood thing, like it kind of doesn't exist. Like it's kind of all an act, you know? Like everybody that I've met is just like a totally regular person. You think that you're going to meet like all these weirdos and people who just have like these outlandish, like super far left ideas, but it doesn't really exist. Nobody actually thinks that way. It's all kind of just for show. And I think that having that integrity, and like if people were to really show like what they truly believed and do what they actually said and act how they actually believed, it's going to make the world a better place, to say the least.
I agree. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to accidentally open a whole can of worms here at the close to 2 hour mark, but
No worries.
that like idea of virtue signaling, just like saying something to appease the perceptions of the masses, or not even the masses, just like a small controlling few.
Yeah.
It's like a perplexing modern issue that we face. But yeah, like a return to integrity, a return to just being someone who says what they believe and acting in alignment with that. It's such a natural separator, and like immediately puts you above the pack, and people like look at and treat people like that differently. So I love that.
Because they can tell. You can always tell if somebody's like full of it or not, you know?
Yeah. It's a really good byproduct of our generation being raised on the internet. I talked about this on my last podcast because he asked me kind of like, how do you discern signal from noise in the online space? And I was like, as bad as it is, I'm sure that we were raised on technology. Like there's going to be all sorts of adverse health effects when we get old, but
yeah,
positively, we know very well online how to tell when someone's bullshitting. Like we've seen the shitty scammer sales videos. We've been on calls with them. Like everybody's probably bought a product online that was not ideal. And so when you get on a call with somebody or see a video of someone, like you can tell who the real ones are very well. And it's crazy that it's true because you're not even feeling the energy of their presence, but even in just the energy that is transmitted through, whether it's their audio or video, we have that good intuitive feeling. So yeah, definitely the ability to perceive someone's genuine essence and when they're acting in true alignment is something that I think the world needs more of, and
it's
everybody
important
has
for
that
sure.
ability. So showing them truth and showing them authenticity and showing up as yourself and not as some sort of act or some sort of like layer or how you think people want to see it is awesome. And then the second question I would like to ask is, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and tell him one thing, what would that be?
Oh man. I'm sure I could come up with a better answer if I had more time to think about this, but off the top of my head, the first thing that comes to mind is I probably would have gone back to my, let's say my 15-year-old self, 14 or 15-year-old self, and I would have taught him about health and fitness the right way the first time. Because, like I said, my dad was always super into the gym, and eating healthy, but he never forced anything on me. And because he never forced anything on me, whether it be religion or fitness or anything, he always kind of like allowed me to find things for myself, which in one sense I really respect, and I'm glad that he did, because it taught me a sort of sense of independence and the ability to find my own way in life and anything of that nature. But at the same time, he would have saved me so much trouble if he had just taught me like a good push pull leg split instead of letting me do like, full body 5 days a week and make absolutely no progress because I didn't know about progressive overload. And at the same time, like, I think I just spent so much time yo-yoing with like my diet and with health and everything. I know 15 is a young age, but I used to eat really, really unhealthy. Like I had the most horrific diet. Everything was processed, everything was frozen, everything was super sugary. And I think that even though I've been kind of like on this health journey very seriously for 3 or 4 years now, I think that I'm having to undo so much damage that I did to myself in my younger years, which could have totally been avoided had I known what I was doing.
Yeah, ditto in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
it's part of like what I've created and put into like my development program is like what I wish I could give to a younger version of myself. Like none of the bullshit, like the simplest 80/20 training, nutrition, all of that stuff. Cause it is such, eventually you get to a place where you realize you're like, it's a simple game. It's not easy to be
Oh my God,
consistent,
so
but it's
simple.
so simple. Like
When I first started getting into health and fitness and stuff, it began when I was 17, because my first girlfriend ever cheated on me and I was super fat and out of shape. I was like, I don't know if I was 5'10" at the time yet, maybe like 5'8", 5'9", and I was like 212 pounds and had like never touched a weight in my life. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to do something about this. And then I learned about calories, and then I tried tracking calories and just like running all the time. And I lost a ton of weight, but I was still like fat and I couldn't figure it out. And then I remember I didn't quite understand how calories worked. I didn't understand that you burned calories just at rest. I thought you only burned calories through exercise. So I remember hearing Arnold in a video saying like, you need to eat less than you burn, right? And I was like, that's impossible. I only burn like 500 calories in a workout, if that. I'm not going to eat that a day. So I gave up on calories, and then I found out about like keto and intermittent fasting and stuff. So then I started doing like carb cycling, and then I started doing keto, and then I started like intermittent fasting, which like I still practice intermittent fasting, but just for the sake of like it's easier on my schedule. you know if I had known that it was just don't eat like garbage and eat less food to lose weight, like God, life would have been so good.
yeah. I think about those years where I was going through puberty, just pumping testosterone and all of the gains I could have made.
I know, dude. And I cut all through my newbie gains. I didn't start like not trying to actively lose weight until I was like 22 years old. It's unbelievable. Like I was in a calorie deficit all through my newbie gains phase.
Yeah. Lessons learned. It's okay. Life is long.
Yeah, life is long. True.
And then the last question is, what is one quote that has always stuck with you or that you try to live by?
These are really good questions, man. You're pretty good at it.
Preach.
Shoot, that's a good question. I think one quote, this it kind of circles back to our like, talk about religion, but there's a Bible verse. I'm forgetting the exact name and number of it now, but be still and know that I am God, I think has had a weirdly profound impact on my life, because I feel like a lot of times we're so zoomed in on everything that's going on, and we don't take a second to kind of like let our lives breathe and just really let me unpack. So what this means to me in a lot of sense is that when you're still and you have no input from the external world, whether it's in meditation, whether it's in prayer, whether you're just kind of like sitting alone with your thoughts, in that stillness, you can learn so much about yourself. And also in that stillness, I think that's when you realize that there is something greater than you that exists out there, because you realize, one, you're not alone in this world, obviously. And two, there is a longing that we all have to connect with whatever that thing is that's greater than us, And I think that pursuit can be so tiring and can be so confusing at times. And I think that the simplest answer is to just be still and know that God is the I am, whatever that is to you, that's God. And if you can generate a relationship, if you can have a connection with that thing that is God, then your life is going to benefit from it in every single way.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And dude, especially after saying that, like you need to get your hands on, and if it means me sending you a copy, like you need to get your hands on Power of Now. And I know book recommendations, especially amongst
Uh-huh.
the learned, is kind of just like, okay, add it to the list, like everyone's recommending books, whatever. But like
Sure, sure.
I think that if you're close to wrapping a book up or you're not reading one right now, you
Hmm.
would love it. And it's definitely something to chew on. Like it's not going to be one that you crank out immediately.
Right.
It's not super long, but it is a lot to internalize. So
Hmm.
I mean, I think all of the discussion today leads me a lot in that direction, and I my highest recommendation is reading that one. I think it's going to
Awesome.
open a lot of things and connect a lot of things that you're thinking about.
I
But
definitely will. There's been a lot of people that like I've really looked up to who have told me that The Power of Now would be a great book. And I think it was just like you said, one of those things where people who are always reading, you're always kind of like, yeah, I'll check it out when I get time. And then another book pops up, and then somebody gifts you a book, and then you start reading that one. And it's just one thing after another. I am currently reading um, Joe Dispenza's Becoming Supernatural.
unreal.
I'm always rereading the Bible
Yeah,
every
yeah, yeah.
night, and I'm also reading Winston's book, Celebrating the Funeral. And I
Nice.
kind of just I like to have a little bit of a like a cycle of books. That way I can read some fiction and some nonfiction and some self help and some theory, and just always cycling in and out. But I will definitely add The Power of Now to my list, and I'm going to put it at the top. So that's the very next book that I will get.
Good man. Have you connected with Winston directly?
Just messaged back and forth, like, telling him that I'm going to buy the book. And he's like, thanks so much, man. And he's like left some comments on my stuff, but no,
Okay.
not directly.
I'm trying to, because I find his mind fascinating. I loved his episode of
Super
the
fascinating, huh?
Soulcast, and I haven't read his book yet.
Uh-huh.
It's like on my list of things to buy, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I just want to pick his brain. I see him for sure as a future guest of the pod, so I'm trying my best to work my way in there slowly. I'm waiting till I've commented under enough of his stuff on Twitter to get a
Uh-huh.
follow back, and then once I get the follow back, then I'll hit him with
Yeah.
a DM. But uh, and I didn't know if you had a direct
Dude,
line
just
of
hit him. Just hit
connection.
him right now. I mean, I can, like, I'll text him and let him know. But yeah, I was just talking to some guys the other day about, they were talking about, I can't remember the name of the other book, but Bronze Age Mindset was one of them. And they were talking, one guy was saying like, I can't really get behind like the wording and the narrative. Like it's really just kind of hard to read. And I was like, dude, check out Celebrating the Funeral. It's like in that same ballpark of kind of like, self-help and like masculinity, but also extremely poetic and follows this beautiful narrative. Like it's an incredible book. um I think that everybody who likes that sort of realm of literature would really enjoy. So definitely reach out to him. That would
Yeah,
be cool to get him on here.
I agree. I think it'll be a sick conversation, and also he's around our age, which is cool. So
Yeah.
it's just really amazing what comes of putting yourself out there, because you really
Hmm.
start connecting with just like amazing people that like for all intents and purposes literally didn't exist until
Right.
like I materialized them by creating some sort of externalization of myself, and then it creates and attracts this world of like, oh, like Jonas is now in my like world, and I now have a connection with him, and we sat for
Yeah.
2.5 hours talking. It's just amazing, and you've talked about experiencing it, and you're building your personal brand too. Like, it's just
Yeah.
so amazing, and it's even hard to like articulate and know exactly how powerful it is. We'll be able to look back, I'm sure, when we're 30, 40, 50, and be like so grateful that we started putting ourselves out there, because I'm already starting to see like really magical fruits, and it's been less than a full calendar year of like really trying to put myself
Same.
out.
Yeah. It's been about like one calendar year for me. um it was really just because I was in touch with Solbra, and he asked me if I had a Twitter, and I was like, yeah, I have a Twitter. He was like, oh, you should use it, throw the sun in your name. And I was like, okay. So then me and like a couple other guys did that too, other people. And then we just started, like, I never used it for the longest time. I had it for like 2 years, And then I finally just started posting stuff. I'd get a retweet here and there, and then like grew. I have like just over 1,000 followers now, and it's so weird to me because I know personally maybe 5 of them, you know. So it's like it's super cool to see this like community that just exists for no reason, like out of nowhere, you know.
Yeah,
it's the coolest thing, and it lets us do stuff like this.
For sure. All right, brother. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. It's been an excellent conversation. We have covered the gambit. I really don't know how I'm going to characterize this in either a description or a title, but I'll see if I can get creative.
I always feel so bad when I was going on Case's podcast. I was like, I got to admit, dude, I'm kind of having some imposter syndrome because I don't have like a book to sell. I don't have a workout program. I'm not like, you know, an expert in anything. So I don't know what you're going to like title this video, but it's been a good conversation.
No, excellent. I mean, I completely agree. And there's no, I mean, I let the conversation kind of dictate what it is. And this is the beauty of the podcast medium. Like, this isn't some like CNBC 60 Minutes. I don't have to pack in a specific like a message
agenda.
Yeah, and like I plan to be doing podcasting for as long as it is available to me. So this is going to be episode probably 31 or 32 for my podcast, and you know, it's going to get washed into the beautiful library of hundreds or maybe thousands down the line. So it's not it's not that I have to go in and kind of like make it explicit. I love just like connecting, and even like something I say with everybody I get on, because we don't know that this recording is going well. It might completely brick itself. So like if like technical difficulties come through and it was just us sharing this moment of like a beautiful conversation, then I'm extremely grateful for that. And of course grateful to you for your time. So I'll give you a chance to let the people know where they can find you, kind of what you're working on. Is there anything specific that you want to, I know you said you're not selling anything, but where can the people find you if they are fascinated with your mind and want to hear more?
Yeah. First of all, it's been an absolute honor. I really appreciate you having me on, and for reaching out. If anybody wants to connect with me, everything's open all the time. You can find me on Instagram, just my name, Jonas Kilker, and my Twitter is the same, Jonas_Kilker. And I'm a little bit more active on Twitter. I kind of like try and keep the Instagram for like bigger picture things, I guess. But the Twitter's a daily thing. For anything as far as like acting goes, if it's on my IMDb and you can figure out where to see any of the things that come out, then, you know, good on you. I just had a little small spot in a feature film called Todd Tarantula, which is streaming on Tubi. Just came out 2 days ago, and working on another feature film that's going to be on Amazon Prime. It's part of a trilogy that I'll talk more about as soon as I know that I'm allowed to. But shooting that in April, and yeah, that's about it for right now.
Very cool. Well, I'll make sure to have all of your stuff included in the show notes so that people can find you. It's been excellent. For those that have made it and soldiered on to the end here with me and Jonas, remember, your time is your most valuable resource. So thank you for spending a little of it with us today. Memento Mori, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Vitruvian Man podcast.
God bless, man. Thank you so much.
Sir.
And if he fails, at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.